In January 2009, Barack Obama became the first African American president. It was an important event in our country's history. Why? Because just 44 years earlier, many African Americans weren't even allowed to vote. Let's take a look at the important people and events that broke down the barriers that led to this major milestone in American history. The White House, located in Washington, D.C., is a symbol of the American government. It's where our presidents live and work. To many people around the world, it is a symbol of freedom. But ironically, the White House was built by enslaved African Americans who had no freedoms at all. They were bought and sold like property and forced to work and never get paid. Slavery was a sad part of America's history. Fortunately, there were leaders like Frederick Douglass. He was an abolitionist, or a person who opposed slavery. He believed in equality for all people. There were courageous people like Harriet Tubman, who helped hundreds of enslaved people escape to freedom on the Underground Railroad. Then, during the U.S. Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, a document that freed all enslaved people. The barrier of slavery was down. However, there were racial segregation laws that forced the separation of blacks and whites. Segregation was another barrier to equality for all citizens. Segregation laws forced blacks and whites to eat in different restaurants, attend segregated schools, and use separate bathrooms. On public buses, black people had to sit in the back of the bus. Again, there were many leaders who stood up and fought for equal rights and freedoms. People like Rosa Parks. She refused to give up her seat on a bus for a white man as required by segregation law. She was arrested, but her actions sparked a change in civil rights law. Another prominent leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., led a nonviolent civil rights movement. People across the nation rallied to oppose racial segregation. It was during this time in American history that Barack Obama was born. The year was 1961, and racial segregation still existed in communities across the country. Although it was almost 100 years after the Civil War, African Americans were still facing barriers, which either prevented or made it very difficult for them to register to vote. People across the country protested. In March 1965, when Barack was very young, African Americans in Selma, Alabama marched to demand the right to vote, but they were violently attacked by police. Later that year, when Barack was just 4 years old, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. The law made it illegal to prevent any citizen from voting. Another barrier was broken down. These people and hundreds more all helped pave the way to Election Day, November 4th, 2008, when American voters chose Barack Obama to be their president. President Obama is the first African American president of the United States. His election represents a major milestone in overcoming racial political barriers in our country. Let's find out more about President Obama's life. Barack Obama's story has its beginnings in a village in the country that is now Kenya on the continent of Africa. President Obama's father's name was Barack Hussein Obama. He lived in Kenya until he was old enough to go to college. He traveled to the United States to study at the University of Hawaii. While in school, he married Ann Dunham. They had a baby boy. They named him after his father, Barack Hussein Obama. Several years later, his father went back to live and work in Kenya, and unfortunately, President Obama's parents ended up getting a divorce. Sadly, Barack only saw his father one more time after that. When Barack was 6 years old, he moved to the country of Indonesia with his mom and new stepfather. As a young boy, Barack learned how hard life could be for poor people in a poor country. When Barack was 10 years old, he moved back to Hawaii to live with his grandparents. He went to school at the Punahou Academy, where he was only one of a very few black students. Barack Obama felt like he didn't fit in. His mom was white, his dad was black, and he was being raised by his white grandparents. And throughout America, there was social unrest between black people and white people. It was hard for young Barack to figure out where he fit in society. But he persevered. President Obama went to college at Columbia University in New York City. While at Columbia, he learned that his father had died. Barack was upset but continued to study very hard at school. After graduating from college, he became a community organizer on the south side of Chicago. It was there that Barack Obama knew that he wanted to help people and be in public service. He decided to pursue a law degree at Harvard Law School. It was there that he broke a barrier by becoming the first black president of Harvard Law Review. It was a very important leadership position to hold. In the summer of 1989, he met Michelle Robinson. They dated and eventually got married. After getting his law degree, Barack became the director of Project Vote in Illinois. His job was to help more minorities to register to vote. He decided then to go into politics. Obama became a representative in the Illinois state legislature, then ran for the United States House of Representatives, but lost. But he pursued his dream. In 2004, he made a speech at the Democratic National Convention. Many people all over the country were impressed with him.
For their prescription drugs and having to choose between medicine and the rent. That makes my life poorer, even if it's not my grandparent.
Later that year, he was elected as a United States Senator. Now he represented all of the people of Illinois in Washington, D.C. In February of 2007, Barack Obama announced that he would run to become the Democratic nominee for President of the United States.
My candidacy for President of the United States of America.
But he'd have to overcome some political barriers and beat the odds by defeating Senator Hillary Clinton to be the Democrats' presidential nominee. Obama used TV, radio, and the internet to let people know who he was and his ideas for the country. In the end, Obama overcame a huge political obstacle and became the Democrats' nominee for president. But there were still barriers to overcome. Obama's opponent in the 2008 presidential election would be the Republican Party's nominee, Senator John McCain. Barack Obama spoke to millions of Americans about how he would help the country if he became president. Then, after months of campaigning, Barack Obama broke down the biggest racial barrier of all, the U.S. presidency. On Election Day, November 4, 2008, Senator Barack Obama was elected President of the United States. President Obama and the success of all the great civil rights leaders who came before him helped to tear down racial and political barriers that existed in America for over 200 years. President Obama's election symbolizes America's promise of freedom and equal rights for every one of its citizens.